The night was cold, and the forest was darker than a cave. The alien girl walked slowly, her body weak, her legs shaking. Her arms scratched and bleeding. Her thin dress was torn, and the wind cut her skin like knives. Every sound in the forest made her heart beat faster. Every snap of a twig felt like a warning. She had been left behind by her people, abandoned after the raid. They said she was too small, too weak, not worth saving. Now she was alone, surrounded by shadows that felt alive. Her eyes searched for light, but there was nothing except the pale silver moon. The trees stood tall and endless, their black shapes twisting like giants ready to crush her. She wanted to cry, but she had no tears left. Her throat dry, her chest heavy. Her steps grew slower, her breath shorter, as if the forest itself was pulling her down. Then she froze. Two glowing yellow dots stared at her from the darkness. They blinked once, then another pair appeared, and then another. Her heart sank as more eyes lit up all around her. She knew what they were. Wolves of this planet, larger, faster, stronger than anything she had seen before. The first growl echoed low, shaking the ground beneath her feet. Her legs trembled, her knees nearly giving out. One wolf stepped forward, its fur black as coal, teeth glistening with saliva. It was followed by another, then another, until a circle formed around her. She turned in every direction, but there was no gap, no path to run. The pack had trapped her perfectly, their eyes reflecting the cold moonlight. She tried to make herself small, wrapping her arms around her chest. Her people had warned her of these beasts. They said no one ever escaped once surrounded. The girl took a step back, and the wolves moved closer, their circle shrinking. She stumbled and fell into the dirt, her palms scraping against sharp stones. The wolves growled louder, their voices rising like drums of war. Her chest heaved, and her body shook as the first wolf lowered its head, ready to strike. She whispered a broken plea, but no one could hear her. No one was coming. She thought she was already dead. The wolf crouched, its muscles tight, ready to leap. She closed her eyes, waiting for the teeth to tear into her. But then, from behind, a voice rang out, strong and human. "Hey!" It shouted, filled with power and anger. The wolves froze for a moment, ears flicking toward the sound. A figure stepped into the circle, tall and steady. In one hand, he held a burning torch, the fire snapping and spitting sparks. The sudden light pushed the darkness back, making the wolves flinch. They snarled but stepped away, their eyes narrowing. The human moved forward, placing himself between the girl and the beasts. His shadow stretched long, the torch painting fire across the trees. The girl opened her eyes in shock. She had never expected a human to be here. Not in this cursed forest. Her people told stories of humans wild, dangerous, untrustworthy. But this one stood tall like a shield. His face hard, his eyes sharp. He shouted again, swinging the torch. Fire roaring through the night, the wolves backed away, their growls uncertain. The human lowered his free hand toward the girl. "Get up," he said firmly. His voice was not soft, but it was steady, and in it was something she had never heard before: protection. Her body refused at first, fear holding her down. But his hand waited, open and strong, the torchlight dancing across his skin. The wolves growled again, pressing closer, their yellow eyes flashing. She had no choice. Her trembling hand reached out, and his fingers wrapped around hers, pulling her to her feet. The warmth of his hand shocked her. It was not cold like the night, not cruel like her people's rejection. It was alive, steady, and real. Her chest ached. But for a moment, she felt safe. The wolves paced, restless, their circle shifting like a storm about to break. The human moved slowly, guiding her back, step by step. He never let go of her hand, never lowered the torch. The beasts snapped their teeth, but none dared to leap into the fire's reach. Finally, the human led her to an old cabin hidden among the trees. Its wooden walls were broken, but it still stood strong enough to shelter them. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, pulled her inside, and shut it hard. The sound of claws scratched against the door, angry and wild, but the firelight burned inside, and for the first time that night, she could breathe. Her body collapsed near the cold hearth, shaking with fear. The human placed the torch in a holder on the wall. The flames flickered, pushing away the dark. Outside, the wolves howled, their voices echoing through the endless night. The girl hugged her knees. Staring at the man who had saved her, she had been ready to die, alone and forgotten. But instead, she found herself in the hands of a human, a stranger who came when no one else would, and though she did not yet know why, she felt her life had just changed forever. The cabin shook with the angry cries of wolves outside, their claws raking the wood, their teeth snapping against the broken walls. The girl sat on the floor near the hearth, her arms hugging her knees, her body trembling so much she could hardly breathe. Every howl was a reminder that death waited only inches away, but the human did not sit. He moved with calm steps, checking the windows, pushing heavy planks against the cracks, blocking every gap he could find. His face was serious, his hands steady, his movements strong, but without panic. It was as if he had faced wolves before, as if danger was something ordinary for him. The fire from the torch still burned bright, and its light painted gold across the wooden walls. The man placed it in a holder, then grabbed pieces of dry wood from a corner, feeding the small fire in the stone hearth until it came alive with heat. The warmth spread slowly, filling the room, pushing away the sharp cold of the night. The girl stared at him with wide eyes, unable to understand why he was helping her. Her people had warned her about humans, said they were selfish, violent, always taking, never giving. But here was one who stood against wolves for her, a stranger who owed her nothing. He turned and caught her staring, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "You can relax," he said, his voice low, steady. "Like a stone, the fire will keep them back for a while." She nodded quickly, but her body still shook. Her heart still raced. Relaxing was impossible, not with beasts outside and a human inside. Her throat was dry, her voice almost broken. But she forced herself to speak. "Why? Why did you help me?" she whispered. The man looked at her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Because you needed it," he replied simply, as if that was all there was to say. She wanted to ask more, but words failed her. No one in her life had ever answered so plainly. Her people always asked for something in return, always counted debts, always demanded. But this man offered his strength without asking for anything. And she could not understand it. The fire crackled, filling the silence between them, outside. The wolves circled, their paws crunching against leaves, their howls echoing like drums of war. The girl shivered, remembering their glowing eyes, the circle of death closing in on her. She looked at the man again, and in her chest she felt something strange, a tiny spark of trust fighting against her fear. The man crouched near an old pot and brushed away the dust. He found a container of water, poured it in, then added dried herbs and some meat wrapped in cloth. The smell rose slowly, filling the cabin with warmth and life. The girl watched as he worked, surprised at how calm he remained. He did not ask who she was, did not ask why she was alone, did not demand her story. He simply cooked, stirring the pot with slow movements. When the food was ready, he poured it into a wooden bowl and placed it near her. "Eat," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. She stared at the bowl, her hands shaking, hunger tearing at her stomach. Still, her eyes lifted to him with suspicion, afraid there might be a trick. The man sighed softly, then took a spoon, tasted the food himself, and nodded. "See," he said. "Not poison, just food." Her lips parted, her chest tight, and slowly she reached for the bowl. The first taste burned her tongue, but the warmth spread through her body. She had not eaten for days, and tears filled her eyes as the soup filled her stomach. She did not look up, ashamed of her shaking hands. But she ate until the bowl was empty. When she finished, she whispered a quiet thank you, though the words felt strange on her tongue. The man only nodded, leaning back against the wall. His eyes half closed, but still alert. The wolves howled again, closer this time, their claws scratching louder against the wood. The girl gasped, fear rising once more, but the man opened his eyes, his voice steady. "They won't come in while the fire burns," he said. "Rest, you need it." Rest, she thought. The word sounded impossible. Her people had abandoned her. The forest had hunted her. The wolves still waited outside, and now she was inside a dark cabin with a human stranger. Her body wanted to collapse, but her mind screamed not to close her eyes. She watched him as he sat by the fire, his face calm, his rifle resting within reach. Every time the wolves growled, he did not flinch, did not move. He was like the fire itself, solid, steady, unshaken. Her eyes grew heavy, despite her fear. Her body finally giving in, she curled against the wall. The warmth of the hearth surrounding her, and as sleep pulled at her, her last thought was not of wolves or her people. It was of the human hand that had reached for her in the dark. The cabin was quiet, except for the crackle of the fire and the distant howls of wolves. The girl sat near the hearth, her thin frame curled up, her eyes half closed but still watching. The man rested against the wall with his rifle across his knees, the torch still burning beside him. He did not look at her much. His gaze stayed on the door and the shadows outside. It was strange for her. Being in the same room with a human, her people spoke of them as monsters. Clever but dangerous, quick to betray, yet this one had saved her when no one else would. The thought kept turning in her mind like a stone rolling again and again. Her throat was sore, her voice weak, but the silence grew too heavy to bear. "Who are you?" she asked softly. Her words shaking like leaves in the wind. The man turned, his head slightly, his eyes catching the glow of the fire. "Just a traveler," he said, his tone low and steady. The answer gave her nothing. No name, no reason, but she felt too small to demand more, so she lowered her gaze. He leaned forward, stirred the fire, the sparks dancing upward like tiny stars. Then he asked, "What about you?" She froze, her fingers tightening around her arms, her chest rising and falling too fast. She did not want to speak of it, the betrayal, the abandonment, the shame, but his eyes waited. Not pushing, not threatening, just waiting, slowly. She whispered, "My people left me." The words hurt her lips as they left, as if speaking them made the wound open again. "They said I was too weak, not worth saving." Her voice cracked, and she hugged her knees tighter. The man said nothing at first, his face unreadable. He only tossed another piece of wood onto the fire, the flames growing taller. After a long silence, he said, "Then they were wrong." She blinked, staring at him. Confused. Wrong, she thought. No one had ever told her that. No one had ever said she was anything but weak. Useless. A burden. Her heart felt strange, as if those simple words carried more weight than an army. She wanted to believe him, but fear still wrapped around her like chains. So she asked, "Why did you risk yourself?" "The wolves could have killed you." He shrugged, his eyes returning to the door. "Because someone had to," he said, "and it looked like no one else would." The words were simple, but they struck her like a blade of light cutting through the dark. She lowered her head again, hiding the wetness in her eyes. Her people never acted without reward, never risked without gain. But this man fought for her with fire and steel, and asked for nothing. It made no sense, and yet felt more real than anything she had known before. The wind outside blew harder, rattling the broken windows. The wolves growled, their shadows moving across the cracks in the wall. She shivered, but her eyes kept drifting back to him. He was calm, steady, his hands ready but not afraid. She studied his face, the lines of it, the way his jaw tightened when the wolves cried. He looked different from her kind, rougher, stronger, but not cruel, and in the light of the fire, she saw something she could not name. It was not softness, not kindness, but something older, heavier, like a mountain that stood against storms without breaking. "Do you live here?" she asked carefully, her voice a whisper. He shook his head. "No. Just passing through." "Then why stay?" she asked again, confused. He looked at her directly for the first time, his eyes sharp. "Because you'd be dead if I left," he said simply. Her chest tightened, her throat burned. There was no lie in his voice, no hidden meaning. He spoke as if life and death were just facts, nothing more, and yet, to her, those words felt like an anchor in a storm. The fire burned low, the cabin filled with shadows again. The girl leaned against the wall, her eyes heavy, but her mind racing. She thought of her people's faces as they left her, walking away without turning back. She thought of the wolves circling, ready to tear her apart. And she thought of the human hand pulling her from the dirt, steady and strong. The questions inside her grew heavy, too many, too sharp. Why would a human help her? Why would he fight for her? What did he see in her that her own kind did not? But no answers came, only the quiet sound of fire and the steady breath of the man across from her. When her eyes closed at last, the fear did not vanish, but something new replaced it. It was not safety, not yet, but the beginning of it, the hint of it. Like the first glow of dawn after the longest night, the girl drifted into uneasy sleep, still curled against the wall, and though the wolves howled outside, she was not alone. For the first time in her life, a human's presence kept the dark away, and in the quiet of the cabin, questions filled the night. Questions she never thought she would ask. The night stretched on, heavy and endless. The girl woke with a start, her body stiff from the cold floor, her ears filled with a sound that froze her blood. A howl, long and sharp, cut through the forest, louder than before. It rolled across the trees like thunder, shaking the cabin walls. She pushed herself up, her eyes wide, her chest heaving. The fire in the hearth had burned low, only a few glowing embers left. The light was weak, the warmth fading, and the darkness pressed closer. The wolves had not left. They were waiting, circling, calling to each other with terrible voices. The man was already awake, standing by the door, his rifle in one hand, a torch in the other. He had not slept, his eyes sharp, his shoulders tense but steady. He turned as she stirred, his voice calm, though the danger grew louder outside. "They're coming back," he said, "and they're hungry." The words struck her like ice, her body trembling harder. She pulled her knees to her chest, whispering, "They won't stop. They won't stop until I'm gone." He looked at her, his face hard, his voice stronger. "They'll stop," he said. "Because I'm here." The girl stared at him, confused. His words sounded impossible, yet he spoke them like truth carved into stone. Her people never spoke that way, never promised protection, never stood between her and death. But this man, this human, said it without hesitation. She wanted to believe him, but fear coiled tighter around her. The wolves howled again, closer now, their voices rising together, a chorus of hunger. The sound made the walls tremble, the windows rattle, the floor shake. The girl covered her ears, tears burning her eyes, but she could still hear them, still feel them. It was as if the whole forest was alive and hungry for her blood. The man moved quickly, throwing more wood into the hearth, the flames rising higher. The light filled the cabin again, chasing away the darkest corners. Still, the growls outside grew sharper, the scratching at the wood louder. The girl whispered, "They will break through." They always break through. Her voice shook, her chest heavy, but the man knelt beside her. He placed his hand on her shoulder, strong and steady. "Not while I'm here," he said, his voice low but unshaken. The warmth of his touch spread through her, fighting against the cold inside her heart. She looked into his eyes and saw no fear, only fire. It was strange, almost unreal, how different he was from the stories told by her people. Suddenly, the cabin shook as claws ripped at the wooden door. The wolves were no longer waiting. They were attacking. The sound of teeth tearing at the wood filled the room. The man stood, pulling her behind him, his body blocking her from the door. He raised his rifle, his face set like stone. The girl's breath caught as the first plank cracked. Splinters flying, the wolves howled again, their fury shaking the cabin walls. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. "Stay behind me," the man ordered, his voice firm and commanding. She nodded, too afraid to speak. Her body pressed against the back wall. The firelight danced across his face, shadows moving like spirits around him. The torch in his hand burned bright, casting light into the cracks of the breaking door. The growls grew louder, the snapping of jaws echoing. The girl's hands clutched the floor, her nails digging into the wood. Every second stretched like an hour, every sound heavier than the last. Then, with a deafening crack, part of the door gave way. A wolf's head forced through, its teeth snapping, its eyes blazing yellow. The girl screamed, her body shaking uncontrollably. But the man did not flinch. He thrust the torch forward, flames searing the beast's fur. The wolf yelped, pulling back, its cries of pain echoing through the night. For a moment, the wolves grew quiet, circling, waiting. The man lowered the torch, his breathing heavy but steady. "They'll come harder now," he muttered, his eyes narrowing. The girl clung to his words. Not knowing if they were warning or promise, she whispered again, her voice breaking. "Why do you fight for me?" The man glanced at her, his face lit by the firelight. "Because no one deserves to be left for the wolves," he said. The words struck her deeper than any blade. Her chest tightened, her throat burned, and her eyes filled with tears. She had been abandoned, forgotten, cast aside, but here was a human standing against the night for her. The howls rose again, louder, fiercer, echoing through the trees. The pack was not done. They would not stop. The girl pressed her forehead to her knees, shaking, but for the first time. A small voice inside her whispered something new. Maybe she would survive this night. Maybe she would not die alone, because outside the cabin, the forest roared with wolves. But inside, the human stood tall, torch blazing, rifle ready. And his promise echoed in her heart again and again. "Not while I'm here." The silence broke with a crash as the wolves hurled themselves against the cabin walls. The wood groaned, the door splintered. Dust rained down from the ceiling beams. The girl pressed her back to the wall, her nails digging into the wood. Her breath short and sharp. Her whole body shook as the sound of snarling filled the cabin. The man stood tall in the center, torch in one hand, rifle in the other. His eyes fixed on the breaking door. The firelight flickered across his face, shadows dancing, painting him in the glow of battle. Another crash, louder, the door cracked open. A wolf's muzzle forcing through, teeth snapping wildly. The man raised his rifle and fired. The blast exploding in the night. The sound was deafening. The recoil strong, but his aim was true. The wolf yelped, falling back, its cries echoing through the pack outside. For a moment, silence returned, broken only by the girl's gasping breath and the crackle of fire. But the quiet did not last. The wolves howled in rage, their voices rising like thunder. The cabin shook again, claws scraping the walls, teeth tearing at every weakness. The girl covered her ears, rocking slightly, whispering to herself, "They'll break through, they'll kill us both." Her voice cracked. Her eyes filled with fear, but the man did not turn. His focus stayed sharp, his voice calm but firm. "They'll try," he said, "but we'll make them regret it." His words struck her like a blade of steel. Sharp, unbending, she looked at him and for the first time felt a strange spark of strength within herself. The wolves did not wait long. The door burst wide open with a crack like lightning. 3 beasts lunged inside at once, eyes blazing yellow, teeth dripping with hunger. The man roared, swinging the torch in a wide arc, the fire screaming through the air. The wolves flinched, snapping back, their fur catching sparks, their growls turning to snarls of fury. He fired again, the rifle booming, the nearest beast collapsing to the floor, but the other 2 leaped forward, their claws slashing through the air. The girl screamed, her body frozen against the wall. But as one wolf lunged at the man, instinct broke through her fear. Her eyes darted to the ground, where a broken plank of wood lay within reach. Her hand shot out, fingers clutching the jagged piece. When the wolf leaped, she swung with all her strength, striking its head. The beast yelped, stumbling, its attack thrown off. The man finished it with a strike from the torch, flames searing its fur. The last wolf snapped its jaws, lunging for the girl now. Her heart stopped, her body froze. But before the teeth reached her, the man slammed the butt of his rifle into the beast's skull. It crashed to the ground, snarling and writhing, until he fired once more, and silence fell. The cabin filled with smoke, the smell of gunpowder and burning fur. The girl dropped the plank, her hands shaking, her chest heaving. Her whole body trembled as she stared at the lifeless beasts on the floor. She had never killed, never fought. But in that moment, she realized she had struck with her own hands. Her stomach twisted, fear and shock battling inside her. The man placed a hand on her shoulder, steady, grounding. "You did good," he said, his voice firm, his eyes meeting hers. She shook her head, tears streaming. "I was so scared." He nodded once. "Fear doesn't matter. What matters is you fought." The words settled deep into her, heavier than anything she had ever been told. Her people had called her weak, useless, a burden, but this human had seen her fight and called it good. Her chest ached, her throat tight, but for a moment. A spark of pride flickered through the fear. Outside, the howls rose again, louder, angrier. The rest of the pack crying out in fury. The man turned to the broken door, his face grim. "They're not done." He muttered, his voice low. The girl's stomach dropped, her hands clutching her knees again. "How many?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He did not answer, his silence heavy. Instead, he checked his rifle, reloaded with steady hands, then lifted the torch higher. The flames roared, casting strong light into the night. The wolves scratched at the walls, testing, waiting, circling like shadows of death. The girl pressed herself against the wall, whispering, "We can't win, not against them all." The man glanced at her, his jaw tight, his voice sharp. "We don't need to win," he said. "We just need to survive till dawn." His words carried weight, a promise wrapped in fire. Her heart raced, but she clung to them as if they were the only rope keeping her from falling. The night stretched on, every howl a reminder that the battle was not over. The man stood ready, fire in his hand, steel in his grip. The girl sat close, her body weak, but her spirit sparked, and though fear still chained her, a new thought entered her heart. Maybe She was not as weak as they had said, maybe, with the human's hand guiding her. She could endure this night. The wolves would return. Fiercer, stronger, unrelenting. But she was no longer alone, and in the heart of the cabin. With fire between them and the beasts, the fight in the night had only just begun. The cabin smelled of smoke and blood, the floor stained where the wolves had fallen. The girl sat slumped against the wall, her breath shallow, her body trembling. Her hands still stained with dirt and fur. The night had not ended. The howls outside still rose and fell like waves. Yet inside there was a fragile silence. The man stood near the broken door, his torch burning low, his rifle heavy in his grip. He stared into the shadows outside, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp, his chest rising slowly with each steady breath. He was hurt. She could see it, scratches across his arms, a cut on his face, blood soaking the sleeve of his shirt. Still, he did not falter, his stance firm, his body like a wall between her and the danger beyond. The girl wanted to speak, but her throat was dry, her lips cracked, her voice trapped inside her. At last, she whispered, "Why do you keep fighting for me?" Her voice shook, part fear, part wonder. For the question had burned in her since the first moment he pulled her from the dirt. The man turned his head, his eyes meeting hers in the glow of the fire. For a long moment he said nothing, as if choosing his words with care. Then his voice came, low and firm, because no one deserves to be left for the wolves. The words struck her chest like a hammer, heavy and sharp. She swallowed, her eyes wet, her voice breaking. "But you don't know me. I'm not your kin. I'm not even human." He nodded once, his expression steady. "Doesn't matter." Those two words wrapped around her like fire in the cold. Her people would never have said them, never have meant them. They abandoned her because she was weak, because she slowed them down, because she was not useful. But this man, this stranger, said her worth was not in strength or blood or usefulness. It was in the simple fact that she should not be left to die. Her chest shook, her tears falling silently, her hands clutching her knees tighter. She had never been defended, never been chosen, but tonight she was, and it was by a human, the very kind her people had called heartless. The wolves scratched at the walls again, their growls echoing, their hunger undiminished. The man turned back to the door, his voice calm but edged with steel. "They'll come again," he said. "They'll keep coming until either we fall or they do." The girl shivered, her breath trembling. "We can't fight them all." His lips pressed into a thin line, his eyes hard. "We don't need to fight them all. We just need to last until the sun." The way he said it made her believe, even as fear still clawed at her heart. Minutes passed like hours, every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves outside made her jump. The man prepared quietly, reloading the rifle, sharpening a knife with slow, careful strokes. His movements were practiced, efficient, no panic, no wasted breath. The girl watched him, amazed at his calm, wondering what kind of life he had lived to be so unshaken. At last, she whispered, "You could leave, you could run. Why stay?" The man paused, looked at her again, and for a brief moment, his eyes softened. "Because if I leave, you die," he said, "and I won't carry that on my soul." The words were heavy, filled with a weight she did not fully understand. But she felt their power, felt the choice he had made. He had decided not to leave her, not to abandon her, even though she was not his, even though helping her brought him nothing but danger. That choice was his, and he had made it with no hesitation. She lowered her head, her tears falling onto the floor. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Why would you choose me when no one else ever has?" His reply was simple, but it struck her like thunder, because someone has to. The wolves howled again. Closer, louder, their hunger sharper. than ever, the girl flinched. But this time, her fear was mixed with something else, a fragile thread of courage. A spark born from his words. She was still weak, still small. But for the first time, she did not feel completely alone. Her hand moved unconsciously, brushing the plank she had used earlier. Her mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, she could fight again if she had to. The man noticed, his eyes glancing at her hand, then back to her face. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. She shook her head quickly. "I'm not. I was left behind because I'm not." His voice cut through her denial. Like fire through ice. "They were wrong," he said firmly. "They couldn't see it. But I do." Her breath caught, her chest aching with the weight of those words. No one had ever said them to her. No one had ever believed she could be more than weak. But he said it, and he meant it. She could see it in his eyes. The fire burned low again, and the man added more wood, sparks rising into the air. The cabin glowed with new light, chasing back the shadows that pressed against the walls. Outside, the wolves growled, their fury clear, their hunger unending. Inside, the girl sat with tears drying on her cheeks, her heart beating with something new. Fear still lived in her, but beside it was hope. A hope born not from her people, not from her kind, but from a human. The choice he had made stood like a shield between her and death. And though the night was not yet over, she began to believe she might see the dawn. The night dragged on, heavy with the cries of the wolves. Every hour felt like a lifetime, the growls scraping against the wooden walls, the howls cutting through the air like blades. The girl sat near the fire, her eyes burning with exhaustion, her body weak, her heart still pounding. The man stood near the broken door, steady and unshaken, torch in one hand, rifle in the other, his shadow stretching long across the cabin. The wolves scratched, they tested, they lunged and pulled, but the fire and the human steel kept them back, and slowly, very slowly, the black sky began to soften. The first gray light of dawn touched the tops of the trees, faint but growing. The wolves sensed it, their howls sharper, their movements more desperate. The girl could hear their claws tearing at the wood, their teeth snapping with fury. But she could also hear something else, the distant call of morning birds. The first sign that the endless night was breaking. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow, as if she did not dare believe it. But the man's eyes caught the faint glow of Kwa. Dawn, and his jaw eased. "They won't stay when the sun rises," he said, his voice calm and certain. The girl looked at him, her lips trembling. "And if they do," he raised his rifle, lifted the torch higher. "Then I'll still be here." The words sent a shiver through her. But it was not fear. It was something deeper, heavier, a strange warmth in her chest, a feeling she could not name. The wolves gave one final cry, loud, furious, echoing across the forest. Then, as the light of morning spilled brighter across the horizon, they began to fade. Their glowing eyes vanished into the shadows of the trees. Their growls grew distant. One by one, the sounds of their paws faded until only silence remained. The forest that had roared with death all night long now breathed with gentle morning air. The girl let out a broken laugh, weak but alive, tears slipping down her face. "They're gone," she whispered. "They're finally gone." Her body collapsed forward, her arms covering her face, the relief too heavy to hold inside. The man lowered his rifle, set the torch aside, and stepped closer. He crouched beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low, steady. The words made her cry harder. But this time it was not out of fear, it was out of release. All night she had expected death. Yet here she was, alive, breathing, heart still beating, and it was because of him, because a human had chosen to stand when no one else would. When she lifted her face at last, her eyes red and wet. He was watching her with quiet patience. She whispered, her voice cracking, "Why did you really stay?" When you could have walked away, he held her gaze, his expression firm. "Because life means something, yours, mine, anyone's." Her lips parted, her chest tight. She had never heard such words from anyone. To her people, life was measured by strength, by usefulness, by survival. But to him, it was measured by something else, something she could not yet understand. And yet, she wanted to. She wanted to know why he valued her when her own kind did not. The cabin filled with the soft gold of dawn. The fire no longer needed. The girl stood slowly. Her legs weak but steady, her eyes meeting his. He offered her his hand once more, the same hand that had pulled her from the dirt, the same hand that had shielded her through the night. For a moment she hesitated, her fear whispering, reminding her of every lie told about humans. But then she reached out, her fingers trembling as they touched his, and this time, she did not take it out of desperation, but out of choice. The warmth of his grip filled her chest. Stronger than the sun outside, her lips shook, but she whispered, "Thank you." 2 small words, but heavier than any oath she had spoken. The man gave a small nod, almost a smile, though faint and hidden in the shadow of his face. "Come on," he said. "The forest will be safe for a while. We'll find better ground." Together, they stepped outside. The morning light spilling across the world, the forest that had been filled with death only hours ago now, glistened with dew, alive with birdsong. The girl tilted her head back. Staring at the sun rising over the trees, she felt weak, scarred, broken. Yet inside her chest was something new. She was alive. And more than that, she was not alone as they walked. Her mind spun with thoughts, her heart heavy with questions. Why had he saved her? Why had he fought for her? Why had he chosen her life over his own safety? She did not know the answers. Not yet. But she knew one truth. She had been surrounded by wolves, abandoned and forgotten. But it was the hand of a human that had reached for her, pulled her from the dark, and given her a chance at life again. And though her path forward was uncertain, though her people had left her, she no longer felt as empty, because now, in the rising dawn, she carried trust, fragile but alive, trust in the one who had stood between her and the night, trust in the human's hand that had saved her.